If you preach the law as the Bible really does, or the gospel as it's really meant to be proclaimed, you'll empty the compact center.
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, absolutely.
Yes.
But what will get people to the compact center is the easy listening version of the law, which is
Tips for human living.
tips for living, and people don't realize that that is in the imperative mood,
We really want to be told what to do, and that's why...
but not by God.
But not by God.
That's
Exactly.
it, right there.
Yeah,
Right there.
Just remove the fire.
On this edition of the White Horse Inn, we're contrasting good advice versus good news. The White Horse Inn, know what you believe and why you believe it.
Five centuries ago, in taverns and public houses across Europe, the masses would gather for discussion and debate over the latest ideas sweeping the land. From one such meeting place, a small Cambridge inn called the White Horse, the Reformation came to the English-speaking world. Carrying on the tradition of the early reformers, welcome to the White Horse Inn.
Hello, and welcome to another broadcast of the White Horse Inn. Turning good news into good advice. That is this program as we're continuing our series Christless Christianity, taking a look in 2008 at some of the ways in which the gospel is being distorted, not just in one particular church or denomination, but really across the whole spectrum, from conservative to liberal, from Catholic to Protestant. And you know, it's no wonder that the average person today assumes that all religions basically say the same thing and that singling one out as the only truth is arrogant. After all, who doesn't believe in the golden rule? Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. The moral law that we find in the Bible, especially the Ten Commandments, is quite similar to the codes of other religions and can be found in civilizations that predate the giving of the law at Mount Sinai. If religion is basically ethics, getting people to do the right thing, then why get uptight over the different historical forms, doctrines, rituals, and practices that distinguish one version of morality from another? Reduce Christianity to good advice, and it blends in perfectly well with the culture of life coaching. Sounding a lot like Dr. Laura, Dr. Phil, Oprah, or Martha Stewart might make it seem relevant, but it's actually lost in the sea of moralistic therapies. When we pitch Christianity as the best method of personal improvement, complete with testimonies about how much better we are since we surrendered all, non-Christians can legitimately demand of us, what right do you have to say that yours is the only source of happiness, meaning, and exciting experiences or moral betterment? Jesus is clearly not the only effective way to a better life now, or to being a better me. What distinguishes Christianity at its heart is not its moral code, but its story. A story of a Creator who, although rejected by those He created in His image, stooped to reconcile them to Himself through His Son. This isn't a story about the individual's heavenward progress, but the recital of historical events of God's incarnation, atonement, resurrection, ascension, and return, and the exploration of their rich significance. At its heart, this story is a gospel, the good news that God has reconciled us to Himself in Jesus Christ. And that's why the gospel has to be proclaimed. News is a particular kind of communication. It comes to us from the outside, taking us away from our preoccupations to hear about something that has happened. If Christianity is not centrally good news, this proclamation of Jesus Christ, then it can be turned into good advice. You certainly don't need preachers. You certainly don't need witness or testimony to events that have occurred in the past. All you need is a little advice. It's not incidental, then, that the story of redemption is called good news. If it were merely information or a program for self-improvement, it would be called something like good philosophy or good enlightenment. But it's good news because it's an announcement of something that someone else has already achieved for us. When we're distracted from this commission, we begin to think of ourselves not as ambassadors of a great king and witnesses to that which someone else has accomplished for us, but we become the stars of the show. Instead of reporting the news, we become the news. In fact, today we hear Christians speak of living the gospel and being the gospel, as if anything we do and are or can be is worthy of being considered a supplement to God's victory in Jesus Christ. Instead of ambassadors, heralds, reporters, and witnesses, we can easily become entrepreneurs, managers, coaches, therapists, marketing and communication specialists who are selling the gospel. And we believe at the White Horse Inn that a lot of this that we're talking about here, a lot of the distortions these days of consumerism, of pop psychology, the therapeutic approach to religion, all of these things ultimately can happen because we confuse the law with the gospel. We forget that the gospel is an announcement rather than another piece of advice. We'll be talking about this in this program with Kim Riddle-Barger, pastor of Christ Reformed Church in Anaheim, California, Dr. Rod Rosenblatt, professor at Concordia University in Irvine, the Reverend Ken Jones, pastor of Greater Union Baptist Church in Compton, and I'm Mike Horton. I teach at Westminster Seminary in California. This is, I know we talk an awful lot on this program about the distinction between law and gospel, and yet here we are talking about it once again because in our day there is a tendency to turn the good news into good advice. First of all, what is the distinction between law and gospel that we're assuming here?
Well, in the Bible, you have sets of propositions that are not the same. Some of those propositions are commands, imperatives from God to His creatures. Do this. And there's a whole different set of propositions that aren't like that, wherein God says, I am going to do this for you for free. And in our denomination, in our Book of Concord, it says, this is a very great light. And to avoid making this distinction is to have the Bible remain a closed book.
Mm-hmm. Well, I remember years ago, Rod, you had a little phrase that I thought was very helpful in making this clear to a lot of evangelicals, and that is the law is what God demands, and the gospel is what God gives. Yeah. And what He demands in the law is what He gives in the gospel.
Yeah, absolutely true. That's so fundamental.
And you find that the statements like that replete in Reformed and Lutheran literature from the 16th century all the way down to the present. The problem is today, a lot of times we don't realize that we are confusing law and gospel because it's easy to realize someone's confusing law and gospel when they stand up and say, stop drinking and smoking or you're going to go to hell. All right, well, that's confusing law and gospel. That we see that. But we don't seem to recognize it when someone gets up and smiles and says, you really could be a better you.
Yeah. Or as you mentioned a couple months ago, Mike, when we were in Miami at a Miami Pastors Conference, law light, and I love that phrase, by the way, but you mentioned how a lot of evangelicals, you quoted one in particular, who says that, Christians are tired of all the rules and the regulations. God doesn't want that. He just wants you to love. Well, duh, that's the law.
That's the law.
Yes.
The law commands you to love God and your neighbor.
Yeah. And boy, that is, I didn't realize how prevalent that mindset is today. People think love is the antithesis of the law.
And the category is the issue. For most evangelicals today, wouldn't you say, the bad news is law, the good news is love, whereas Jesus summarized the whole law as love.
Exactly.
Love God and love of neighbor.
Luther got that advice when he was working like crazy against his damnation as he perceived it. And one of the things that Rome offered to him was, don't go to confession 6 times a day, just love God. And his response was, love God, sometimes I hate Him.
Yeah, same with Calvin. There was in one of his writings, he says,